Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of The Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, host also of RT's talk show, Crosstalk. And today, we are very fortunate to have as our guest a good and old friend of The Gaggle, Dmitry Babich, who everyone has seen.
A member of the community.
Exactly. Is often a guest on Crosstalk, and a man who's extremely knowledgeable about Russia, which is why he's here, because today we're going to discuss the Russian parliamentary elections that are taking place this weekend. And of course, many of us, in fact, most of the gagglers, are depending on Western media coverage for their knowledge of what's going on in this election. So it's a good idea for us to talk to Dima, who's obviously an expert on Russian politics, and to hear from him his perspective on what we should be looking out for. So first of all, we kind of want to find out from Dima, are these elections significant? I mean, should we be paying any real attention to them? And if so, what is their significance? And in particular, what kind of things should we be looking out for? What are the kind of important signs of impending political change or lack of, or whatever? So anyway, Dima, what's the significance of this election?
Well, I think this election is important. Well, first, people will be electing 9 governors. You know, Russia has 85 regions, so 9 of them will get their governors elected by direct vote. Yes, there was a period in the early years of Putin's rule when the governors were appointed by the president. Usually they were confirmed by the vote of the regional legislature. This was not reported in the Western press, but now we are back to direct election of governors in most of the region. You know, there are exceptions. Dagestan elects its president, you know, the parliament elects the president. Why? Because Dagestan is such a multi-ethnic republic. You know, there are clans, there are groups, inevitably. So in this situation, kind of a collective leadership, you know, kind of limiting the ethnic influence is necessary. But in most of the regions, governors are elected by direct vote. In Tatarstan, the head of state is still called the president. So, that is already important because governors do play a very important role in running the regions. Second, we will see how well United Russia will do in these elections.
Well, can you maybe describe what United Russia is for our viewers?
Well, United Russia is the so-called party of power, as this is not only in Russia. It plays roughly the same role as Liberal Democratic Party in Japan or as the Christian Democratic Party in Italy in the post-war years. What is important? In the regions, most of the governors are members of United Russia. Not necessarily. Some regions are run by communists, and one of them is run even by a member of LDPR, Zhirinovsky's party. But most of them, in most of the regions, governors are members of United Russia. So if United Russia does poorly at parliamentary elections in that region, usually that means that the governor will have to quit. Usually the governors do it on their own, but obviously there is pressure from the president. And there are some cases when the president can say that this particular governor does not enjoy my trust. That means new elections will be called.
If we could just stay with United Russia, I mean, what is their political configuration? What are their political colors for people to try to understand? Because it is the party of power, a pedestal party, and Putin looks favorably upon it, but he's not a member of it, which there's always people criticizing that. So, I mean, you know, it's one of the things I always hate doing is comparing Russia to other countries. But can you compare United Russia to like other parties in the world? How it's similar, how it's different?
Yes. Well, first, it's just summarizing what I said. If the United Russia is doing poorly in that particular region, the governor will have to quit. So the voters, if you ask me, what can the voters do at this election? They cannot make a revolution. They could make a revolution in 1993 by voting the communists in power. They could make a revolution in 1996 by voting Yeltsin out of power. Now the voters cannot make a revolution, but they can send a very important message that will have consequences. And United Russia, of course, is like any party of power, like LDP in Japan, like Democrazia Cristiana in Italy. Of course, it's a conglomerate of people with sometimes very different views.
So it's a big tent party.
Exactly. There was a liberal platform in United Russia that you don't hear much about now for obvious reason, because liberalism is not a popular word in Russia because of the foreign pressure. I mean, I bet you know, if you know, the Republican Party was not particularly popular in the American South after the Civil War for obvious reasons. When you have a foreign adversary using a particular ideological you know, label, then of course you know, the liberal platform in United Russia is not very vocal now, but it exists. It certainly exists, and people know who are the members of this platform. But there is the main current in the last 2 or 3 years was the conservative patriotic current, and that was expressed in the amendments to the constitutions. To the constitution, which were, as you know, supported by the majority of voters, not just the majority of people who came to vote, but the majority of voters.
But
that
just
was
to
really important.
Just to follow up on Peter's question, so what is then the connection between United Russia and Putin? Because most, like you were talking about these constitutional amendments, I mean, the way it's presented in the West was that it's, oh, these are amendments proposed by Putin, but you're saying that it's not, it's the United Russia that's
It was the result of collective labors, I would say. You know, it was a collective decision. But Putin is certainly more popular than United Russia for a number of reasons. You know, United Russia is very demanding of its members. If a communist gets drunk in public, unless he beats up someone or commits a crime, usually such people are not expelled from the Communist Party. If a United Russia member, especially an official, gets himself or herself into a nasty story, like a car accident or something, usually these people are expelled. So United Russia is also a kind of a disciplinary mechanism for the elite. United Russia is, of course, less popular than Putin for obvious reasons. You know, you have lots of all sorts of officials. Some of them are not very popular, especially at the grassroots level. And this is, in general, a pattern of Russian psyche. In the middle of the Kremlin, there is good. There is an eternal good. Between us and the Kremlin, there are corrupt officials. Some people call this psychology outdated, but I see it in many other countries. I see it in China. I see it in the United States in a lot of ways. So it's human. You know, when people say that this is particularly Russian, no, it's human. And Putin doesn't want to be a member of the United Russia first. You can see even from his statements, he does not like parties. He does not want to kind of liaise himself with any party. He keeps repeating, I was in the Communist Party for 18 years, so I can tell you, you know, and usually something ironic follows. So obviously, you know, if you look at his life, he grew up with the country. He changed together with the country. And the Communist Party of the Soviet Union obviously did not change fast enough. Obviously, there was a lot of hypocrisy that Putin disliked, even back then, you know. So I think that explains why he doesn't want to liaise himself with United Russia.
It's kind of interesting because when I first moved here, I remember the 1999 parliamentary election, which was simply awful. I mean, there were so many parties running. There were oligarchs that invented their party. They were like taxi parties to go from A to B. And there were so many of them then, and I've forgotten because there was such a tumultuous time. But now one of the criticism is my lead into this, is that parliamentary politics, political party politics, pretty boring here. And I would say that's not a bad thing, because as people remember the absolute chaos of how democracy was practiced in the 1990s, and you had outside meddling, very open, and they were very proud of it. And since 2000, things have really, really calmed down. You have more than two parties, but a very limited number of ones that pass the bar to get in. I mean, is this something the electorate likes? There's more stability there because these parties are different, but they're not particularly blood enemies of each other at the same time.
Well, to be frank with you, I like party politics. I mean, I liked it for 20 years because, when the Soviet Union collapsed, I was 21 years old. And I dreamed of, having various groups, parties, choices. But if you look at the statements, even from the people like Solzhenitsyn, the real spiritual leaders, parties were never particularly popular in Russia. The idea was that parties can be influenced. They are not really, reflecting the people's will. It's just, even if you listen to the church leaders, they in Russia, the official church is usually very mild spoken, it doesn't force its opinions on anyone. But when our priests want to say something negative, they usually talk about party politics. They talk about splitting society, And so that is one of the reasons. The second reason is indeed that the party squabbling in the 90s was awful. You remind me of 1999. It was the time when Mikhail Khodorkovsky got his people into the parliament, and he got them through the Yabloko.
As well.
Yes, Khodorkovsky was quiet during most of the 90s. That's why I don't believe he is a genuine Democrat, because when there was complete freedom and democracy, unmanaged democracy, Khodorkovsky sat quietly there, making his billions. That's how he became the richest man in Russia of the 90s. A rather dubious, I would say, a rather dubious achievement if you call yourself the richest person in the Russia of the 90s. But he got his people into the Duma via Yabloko, which was a liberal party, but also more of them via the Communist Party.
Yeah.
So people, it's a typical situation: a billionaire who uses parties for his own ends. Like Berezovsky asked Zyuganov to make him a member of the Communist Party. Well, that was, of course, a very kind of mocking gesture from him. Like, I don't care about the parliament. I don't care about you. I can buy you all. And people knew that there were Berezovsky's people even inside KPRF, the Communist Party. So that all of that kind of lessened the appeal of party politics and of parliamentarianism in Russia. And how basically, you asked me about United Russia. The party of power in Russia changed several times. First, they tried to create a liberal party of power, and Yeltsin and Gaidar had nothing against it. If you look, look at the Western newspapers in 1993. There was a new party called the Choice of Russia, later renamed Democratic Choice of Russia, which was the party of power. And the West, and of course, it used dirty tricks during the election, and of course, it used the state resources, and the Western media had nothing against it. When Democratic Choice of Russia lost to Zhirinovsky suddenly in 1993, I mean, Zhirinovsky got more votes for his party. The Democratic Choice of Russia won in the constituencies, because this is the way party of power usually wins, not necessarily on the party ballot, but also in the constituencies. But then the Western press was stunned, and none of them said, oh, how nice, the state has lost, the party supported by the state has lost. The West was, you remember, terrified, like, oh, a fascist comes to power in Russia. Well, Zhirinovsky was always a joke, he was not a fascist. Of course, you can find lots of ugly quotes in his speeches, but that doesn't mean anything. So basically, what we have now, I think it was an interesting election, and just a few things that our viewers might find interesting in the Western coverage, since we're talking about the Western coverage. In the Western newspapers, German, French, English, American, you read the same thing, that the election is not interesting. It is dull. Everything has been decided in advance. It will be falsified. Okay, if it is falsified, then why did the so-called why there are so many dirty tricks which the Western press attributes to Putin? Why were there fake candidates, with the same second names as the candidates, serious candidates running in various constituencies? Why was there so many, unthinkable tricks, to get the voters on your side? If you falsify the election, you don't need it. You just, add a few zeros to the number of votes cast for you, and that's the end of the story. The other interesting thing, they say all the interesting candidates have emigrated. Well, first, people who left Russia, first, I don't call them immigrants because usually nothing threatened them here. And a lot of them come here back for TV shows. Like Konstantin Egert lives in Vilnius, but he calls himself a political immigrant, a victim of Putin. But he comes to Moscow once in 2 months, once in 3 months, to speak on television, on state television, on TVC and other such channels. And of course, there are lots of private radio stations which are openly anti-state, like Matvey Ganapolsky. Okay, maybe not many of our foreign viewers know him, but believe me, in Russia, he is known as the most scandalous anti-Putin liberal radio commentator. He is to Putin what Rush Limbaugh was to Biden or Obama.
You can add to that websites that discuss Russian politics that are of all different flavors.
Absolutely. But that I don't even mention. But Ganapolsky said he emigrated to Kiev. He fled to Kiev. He fled to Ukraine. He could not stay in Russia. He was so persecuted. Every morning, he speaks on Echo Moskvy to millions, potentially tens of millions of listeners in Moscow. Not only in Moscow, Echo Moskvy is broadcast in dozens of big cities with millions of population all over Russia. So I don't believe that you can call someone an emigre, a victim of the regime, if that person is not prevented from returning and speaking, and even from abroad, he speaks to millions of people via radio. So it's a much trickier story than the Western press reports.
Could you just address the issue that is raised very often in the Western media, which is that Navalny and his supporters are unable to take part in this election? I mean, is that true? And if so, why is that?
Well, FBK, his organization, was declared an extremist organization only a few months before the election. They have been working quite legally for years, and they participated in political life even after Navalny got a suspended sentence a few years ago. I see a lot of people who worked with Navalny who are running. I mean, in Moscow, look, Alena Popova, who was a deputy to Ilya Ponomarev, the person known even in the West, as very anti-Putin leader. Believe me, she has the same views as him, even more radical. She's running in my constituency in Vostochny Okrug, which is in the east of Moscow, right? I can vote for her if I like her. People from Navalny's circle, some of them have been elected deputies already, local deputies, like Ilya Yashin, who is also known in the West, right? He's a deputy in Moscow.
Dima, maybe you can explain here this designation, these different designations that disqualify individuals and parties from political life. It's my understanding is because they have known connections to Western organizations and individuals, and they may even be taking money from them. In that way, they are designated as a foreign agent.
Well, this is a very recent phenomenon, and that's why people get confused about it, because the whole idea of a foreign agent appeared just about 5 or 6 years ago, and for 3 years it was not enacted. I don't remember any. Well, first it was the media started. It was an obligation to write next to Taliban and next to Al Qaeda that these are terrorist organizations prohibited in Russia. which looked pretty stupid. I mean, I'm sorry, it is stupid. I remember that recently I was writing an article about the Knights of the Temple, you know, the Templars. And I felt like subconsciously I wanted to add in parentheses an extremist organization prohibited in Russia. So that's how it all started. And then just recently, in the last 2 years, political groups, radical political groups in Russia, which obviously for many years had financement from abroad and had support from foreign governments, they started to be designated as foreign agents. Some of them officially, I mean, like Levada Center, okay, they write at the top of their site, we are an organization performing the functions of a foreign agent. But next to it, you have a statement from their chairman, Lev Gutkov, saying, I don't agree with that. This is not true, you know. And Gutkov, every time when the American president came to Moscow, wrote an open letter like Putin is such a dangerous person, don't talk to him or do something against him. So, of course, Lev Gutkov is dependent on foreign money. And of course, he is a radical anti-Putin, anti-government, anti-Russian politician. And you know, he had been operating in Russia for decades, quite openly, legally. Now, the only problem he has is that people should know, you know, that he indeed gets financing from abroad. It doesn't bring any immediate consequences. You're not going to be imprisoned. You're not going to be fined. It's just that people must know.
It's just transparency.
Right.
Yes, but also I think a lot of people get this foreign financing without ever being labeled as foreign agents, because. But
is that the same thing as extremist organizations? Or extremist
organizations? No.
So what exactly does the extremist organization mean?
A foreign agent is a political organization involved in political activities in Russia, getting money from abroad. If you are just a charity organization, if you help people with AIDS in Russia, you know, you are not labeled a foreign agent, because only political activities are labeled as foreign agent for activities of a foreign agent, and that is not a crime. You know, that is just, you have to if the Justice Ministry found out that you get this money from abroad and you are involved in the political activity in Russia, you have to notify people about it. Membership in an extremist organization, just as well as extremism itself, is a crime. You know, there is an article for that in the criminal code introduced about 10 years ago with huge scandals, you know, but it states very clearly that what is extremism. Extremism is when you declare a certain social group or a certain ethnos or a group of people you know, as enemies, your enemies, and you say that violence should be used against them. Calls for violence, basically. That is the idea of why you can be called an extremist organization. Well, you probably remember that Navalny's people and a few other people, including Ilya Ponomarev and others, you know, including Vladimir Kara-Murza, for years they have been compiling blacklists of Russian citizens who need to be subjected to Americans and Western sanctions in general. I mean, look, just type it on your computer and you will see that for years they have been doing that. So little by little, Russia has lost patience, not only the state, but also Russians, because anyone can be, you know, I say something bad about Vladimir Kara-Murza now. Believe me, he will include me in that list, because in that list, they have a special place for people involved in propaganda against the democratic forces of Russia. That is also a reason why these people can include you in the blacklist. And the Western legislation has changed. First, the Magnitsky Act was only adopted in the United States. Then it was adopted in Britain, in the Baltic states. Now it is something similar to that is already in the legislation of the European Union. And what is Magnitsky Act? You can be declared guilty without trial. and you can be punished without trial. You don't even, I mean, the problem with the Magnitsky List is that no one knows, no one knows who is included in that list and who is not. It is a
and even if you find out you're on the list, there's no way for you to appeal it, to defend yourself.
Absolutely, and no one, you just, you know, they accuse you of breaching human rights. On the basis of what? Just the media reports, you know. There is no trial, there is no lawyer, you know, there is no prosecutor, there's no attorney, there's no judge. Just someone sits in the government in Washington, in Warsaw, in the Baltic republics, in the UK, and decides, why don't we include this person in that list? I think he breached human rights, you know. So anyone, you know, someone who arrested Navalny for 15 days, you know, 2 years ago. That person, even though there were obvious cases when Navalny and his people provoked violence, you know, when Putin's inauguration took place in 2012, it was obvious that these people wanted to have an unsanctioned rally near the Kremlin, and they were provoking police. Coming back to your question, extremism is a crime. Being a foreign agent is not a crime.
George, we wanted to talk about the adjectives in front of democracy.
Yes. Well, yeah, I think that's the interesting issue, because of course how the media present this, which is either if it turns out that the results were for United Russia were not as good as the government had wanted, rejoicing, celebrations, high fives all around. If, however, the results are, you know, what they were in 2016, or even better, then, oh well, of course it's all fraud. And so the question then becomes, oh, this is a managed democracy. So the question is, what exactly is it? What kind of a democracy is Russia, would you say?
Well, I would say that Russia is a managed democracy, and it was not Putin or United Russia who made it a managed democracy. It was the liberals of the 90s who made it a managed democracy after the events of 1993, you know. Until between 1989 and 1993, Russia was probably the freest country in Europe, because you had, you know, free for all. Basically, even armed groups were not prohibited. You know, when that confrontation between Yeltsin and what was then called the Supreme Soviet of Russian Federation took place in Moscow, there were armed people, you know, just acting on both sides, and it was a small model of a civil war. So after that, please note, liberals won elections until 1993. After the burning of the White House and the violent removal of the parliament, liberals in Russia have not won a single election. That was the turning point. Not Putin's coming to power, not the creation of the party of power. You know, liberals lost all of the elections, and it's a huge irony, you know, that the liberals are talking about honest elections, even though they stopped winning. They stopped winning since 1993 because people blamed, justly or unjustly. I think that the communists also were terrible in October 1993. I saw the actions. It was also, they are not angels, but the people blamed the liberals because the tanks fired on the White House or on the Supreme Soviet in the name of liberals. So then in December 1993, the new constitution was adopted, drafted by several liberal thinkers, you know, Baturin, Alexeyev, which basically made Russia almost a monarchy, a presidential monarchy. You know, the president had full power. If there was a, sorry.
A lot of people don't understand that, is that during Putin's time in high politics, either as president or prime minister, or returning as president, had supermajorities in the parliament and did not significantly alter the constitution, though he had the power to do that, okay? And it's not his constitution, it's Yeltsin's constitution, which so many people want to intentionally overlook.
Well, if you want my definition of Putin, he is a liberal, especially in the economics. Okay, he, as a lawyer, he adores the law. He wants everything to be according to the law. And I think he didn't alter this constitution, even though he was suggested to do this many times, because he genuinely supports the liberal values. But there was one thing illiberal about this constitution adopted in 1993. The president had almost monarchical powers. I mean, if the Duma 2 times rejected the president's candidacy for the prime minister, the president could either dismiss the Duma and call a new election, or dismiss the government. And of course, everyone understood that the Yeltsin choosing between his puppets in the government and the Duma would dismiss the Duma, you know. So it was the liberals, the authors of the Constitution of 1993 who made Russia manage democracy. It was not Putin. And, just one quick note, yes. In December 1995, the communists won the Duma election. You ask me how important is the Duma election. The communists won with a landslide, and Yeltsin enjoyed the support of just about 6% of the population in December 1995, which was a disaster because in 1993, Yeltsin and the liberals won a referendum, very honest referendum in April 1993. I remember. I was covering that referendum, and just very quickly, and then the oligarchs were panic stricken, and they got together, all of them, Berezovsky, Khodorkovsky, who was the shadiest of them, Kuczynski, and they paid, you know, the huge amount of money, and Yeltsin won in 1996.
Forget about Chubais.
You know, with lots of tricks, like he didn't win in the first round, but General Lebedь, who was supposed to be like the third force, you know, between Yeltsin and Zyuganov, just called on his supporters to vote for Yeltsin in the second round. So Yeltsin just barely made it, right? And still, it's a huge mystery how people actually voted. The liberals in 1996 destroyed all the ballots. You know, this is the only case when it was just ordered to burn all the ballots. And the United States did not protest. You know, no one protested yet because our guy has won. So why should we doubt that, right? And so in short, you know, the conclusion is it was the liberals who made the Russian liberals who made the Russian constitution illiberal and Russian democracy illiberal.
George, you want to jump in?
Yeah. You say that Putin is basically a liberal, but at the same time, I mean, he obviously believes in a strong presidency. I mean, that's and that would make sense. However, I mean, you know, he's been talking, and I mean, he was talking particularly, I think it was last year, about making parliament a lot stronger. I mean, in other words, he's saying that you know, Russia needs to move away from excessively strong presidency, and there should be given more powers to parliament. Is that really going ahead? Does parliament now have more powers, or is it just simply talk?
Well, I think everything will depend on the situation, because look, Putin and his people, they limit freedoms only when there is absolutely no way out. I mean, like now, this legislation on foreign agents, it was introduced after many years of direct Western involvement in Russian politics. I mean, in 1996, read the Time magazine. The Americans boasted, they boasted of Putin, Yeltsin back in power, you know. And the people who helped Yeltsin to get elected in summer 1996, they later became the top people in Yeltsin's administration. Some of them are still around in politics, but I noticed that Putin doesn't like them. He somehow took out almost all of them. Usually it was not sometimes officially announced, but because they were so corrupt. I mean, they had huge property abroad. And one of the main moves in this new amendments to the constitution that Putin suggested, I think much more important than the role of the parliament, you cannot have property abroad. If you are a deputy, if you want to be a minister, if you want to be a member of parliament, heaven forbid, if you want to be a president, you cannot have an apartment in New York.
And dual citizenship as well.
And dual citizenship. So,
Dima, when looking at the changes here, and when you said that basically as a last resort where they have to do something, how much did the illegal overthrow of the elected government in Ukraine in 2014 influence the way the authorities deal with it? Because there was Victoria Nuland bragged that $5 billion were spent on the Ukraine project. I mean, how did that impact the way they think here?
Okay, let's be honest about it, and let's tell our viewers the real picture. Okay, I'm not idealistic about political elites. Russian political elite, just like any political elite in the world, has one top priority, that is keeping power and money. It doesn't mean that this elite doesn't change, that it doesn't want competition, no, but it doesn't want revolutions. You can call it political stability, you can call it whatever you want, right? But Russian political elite is also special in the following sense. The top priority is political stability, keeping money in power. The second priority is integrating itself with the Western elite. And this was a very important priority in the 90s. Yeah. Even now, despite huge hostility from the West, just look how reluctantly Putin and the Russian elite are slowly burning the bridges with the West. In fact, it's always the West that burns the bridge. They burn their side of the bridge when it's already almost non-existent. Not only in the sphere of arms control, but look, I mean, just a few years ago, there were summit meetings between the EU and Russia every year, every half of a year. It was not Russia who canceled it. It was the European Union. And now when two pretty anti-Russian presidents, Macron and Merkel, okay, Merkel is a chancellor, but anyway, pretty anti-Russian heads of state, when they suggested meeting Putin, just meeting him, they were not allowed to do so by the democracy of the EU, by Lithuanians, Poles, others who said, we don't want that bridge. We don't want it in any way, So
it's interesting just to follow up on that about how the Russian leaders talk about the Europeans and the Americans, and how the Europeans and the Americans talk about the Russians. They always say our European colleagues, our European partners, our American partners. The Americans never refer to them as our Russian partners or our Russian colleagues. So it's a kind of an interesting how, that just shows how, that they always want to be, well, we're still part of the same group.
Yeah,
whatever our disagreement.
Who is the belligerent side here? I mean, Hillary Clinton, just off the hand or off the cuff, called Russia several times a hostile nation. Right. I can imagine what a scandal it would unleash in the United States if Putin or the prime minister here would say, by the way, the United States, a hostile nation forever, is plotting this and that. But coming back to the priority. So the first priority is to keep power and money. The second priority is to get Russian elite integrated with the Western elite. And the third priority is to replace old Soviet social guarantees with, paid social services. Sometimes part of it is paid by the state, but it's not going to be for free. I mean, if you look at Putin's social policy, you can probably notice one thing that the Western media never mentions. He doesn't give money for nothing. He lowers the taxes for the people who decided to start their business. He helps the families with children. He helps the families that took mortgage, but you must do something so that the state would support you. You must have a child, start a mortgage, start a business, do something, and then the state will support you. That's the idea.
That's a very good point. It's something, it's not so apparent now, Dima, but I think you would agree with me that in the 2000s, the first decade of this century, when we saw a major cut down on states' paid services, basically monetizing and saying, giving people money to make decisions on their own, which I actually prefer. But one of the interesting things is that, at least here in Moscow, a middle class had developed, and it was a very vibrant middle class. And they got really angry that the state was taking away things that were free, but they had their own businesses where they could make money. So, I mean, they wanted the best of both worlds, and you can't hold that together forever, okay? So, I mean, yeah, and it was very, very controversial. I think it was 2004, 2005 when they did that. And of course, Western media went up in arms, you know, this is all botched and everything. Actually, it's been quite successful. I wanted to ask you to maybe kind of just bread and butter issues. When people talk about Russian elections and parliaments and parties and like that, they have it in kind of very messianic, totalistic terms. But what are Russian voters thinking about? Inflation, schools, what are the issues?
Actually, at this election, what is good about this election? Whatever ideology you have, whatever views you prefer, you will find a party representing these views. Okay, suggest you are a liberal. Okay, there is Yabloko. You are an environmentalist. There are two parties. One is called the Green Party, the other one Green Initiative. And they have a chance of getting into the Duma. You are a Russian nationalist. There is Rodina. You are, I don't know, a social democrat. There is just Russia. So basically, ideologically, the people say, you know, it's all the presidential administration that manages it. You know, how real are Russian parties? Well, my counter question is, how Christian is the Christian Democratic Union in Germany, right? I can tell you the Russian parties are more real than CDU is Christian, right? Because in the modern world, yes, it's a very complicated political system, probably too complicated for human beings. This is one of the problems of modern world. Things are too complicated to be run, you know, in the format of a talk show. Yes, certain things are managed, but they are carefully managed, and people are treated to a wide variety of choices. Well, which issues are being discussed? Well, there are old-style politicians. I was recently at a meeting of political consultants, and one of the persons there who was from Just Russia, he said, well, for me, he was an old guy, you know, about 60. For me, every election is a fight between the power and the people against power. So this is a very, I'm sorry, this is a very perestroika post-Soviet approach, actually a Soviet approach. Like, do you like communists or not? You know, why do you come to the voting booths? In 1989, when the first honest election was held in Russia, people came to the voting booths to say no to the Communist Party, to show it a secret, you know, their secret disdain for what the communists are doing, all of them, you know. I remember the sentiment. And we should get more mature. Yes, there are people like that, but and the West is very much supporting that mentality. And if you look at the so-called liberal sites, the whole discussion there is, who is the real Putin hater here? Who is indeed against, you know, oh no, that guy is a fake, you know, he's Putin's agent. That other guy is also fake, you know, he will not do what he promised.
Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have a lot in common, huh?
Exactly, but I mean, this is childish, it's not serious. And people, even when they don't say it out loud, they actually dismiss it, you know. When Navalny came to Russia, which was obviously a provocation of the West. I mean, he could sit in Germany and have a nice life there, and even speak on Russian radio and on private TV channels. Everything would be fine. But obviously, the West decided, okay, let's go va-bank now. You know, this guy is so popular. He has just been almost poisoned. let's throw this bomb into the Russian Empire. And okay, he came and he got in jail and nothing happened, And I remember how disappointed the West was. I mean, they tried to get all of these, all of their correspondents went to Moscow streets looking for people protesting. Well, when there is a real protest, I can tell you what it is. It was in 1989. 1 million people get in Luzhniki, or some other place, not necessarily in the center of the city. When there is a real protest, when people are really angry, it's obvious, and there were reasons for protest in 1990 because Gorbachev mismanaged the economy so terribly, and people were so tired of 70 years of communist rule that there was real protest, real disdain. Now there is no real protest.
So Dima, could you say something about well, first of all, say something about the Communist Party, because they're expected to come in second behind United Russia, and then maybe also say something about Zhirinovsky's Liberal Democrats, which baffle everybody. First of all, because Zhirinovsky is thought to be this wild, crazy nationalist. So why does he call his party Liberal Democratic Party? But they're also
not democratic.
So just tell viewers, something about first the communists. Is this still Lenin's party? Is this Brezhnev's party? I mean, what kind of entity is it?
Let's start with Zhirinovsky because it's an easy one, right? It's obvious that he was a provocateur created by the KGB around 1988, 1989. And his task was to kind of mock the genuine democratic activity. That's hence his name, the Liberal Democratic Party of the Soviet Union. That's how it was called originally. And I think originally it was supposed to be just a very informal try, just a joke, maybe. I think KGB people expected it to last for 2 or 3 weeks. And suddenly, it was successful. I mean, the attempts to crush, the liberals by saying that they are foreign agents. At the time, they didn't work because first, there were very few real foreign agents. I mean, how could you even pay money to your agents inside the Soviet Union? You had to bring them in a suitcase with a double bottom, and it was all technically a very complicated procedure, right?
You could pay them in Levi jeans and things.
Levi jeans or something, or you could bring a whole lot of Playboy issues so that people would sell them, and then there would be questions on the border, why Playboy, why so many issues. Now it's not a problem. I mean, if I want to send money to you for political activity, I send them to you. And how will people find out if I send them to you as a friend because you are stranded in Budapest, or I send them to you because I want you to topple Viktor Orban, right? So it's just a new world. So the serious attempts to discredit the liberal opposition in the 80s, they all failed. And Zhirinovsky's comedy suddenly worked because he was entertaining, he was young, he was funny, he danced very well. He was an excellent parody, something that people liked. And well, now he is much older, and I expected him to get off the stage long ago because I'm actually not a fan of his acting. I think there are nice ways to be an actor. Russia has a great theatrical tradition into which he doesn't fit. He fits into. I think he fits into late Soviet, really rough humor, but his party is the youngest in Russia. His faction is the youngest in the Duma. So he is not so simple as he seems. He knows how to deal with the business. He knows how to convert political influence into money. He struck some kind of a deal with the state that actually what he is doing, I think that is corruption, right? But the state decided to tolerate him as a kind of a less evil, because he he was very good at basically subverting some real attempts to destabilize the situation in Russia. Like when the communists were really threatening to put things upside down in the late 90s, he parodied the communists. Like he said, like, you want to take the Kremlin just like you did in 1917. I will not allow you to do that. You say you will go by 3 columns. You will go to jail number 1, jail number 2, jail number 3. And it was just, it made parliamentary life into a nice show. So in a way, the state is paying him back now. So that's an easy one. You know, with the communists, it's a much more complicated issue because Communist Party of Russian Federation is now a conglomerate of very different forces. You have Zyuganov, who is obviously getting old, but who proved to be very, very cunning in controlling the party apparatus. I mean, he managed to survive all the protest votes. You know,
just to be sure, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you make it? Can you elaborate how the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is not the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, because people still make that connection? Go ahead.
Well, legally and in fact, it has nothing to do with the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, because the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was officially kind of canceled and even prohibited for some time after the events of 1991 by Yeltsin. And Communist Party of Russian Federation was founded later in 1992 by Zyuganov. Of course, he used a lot of people from the old party apparatus. Basically, who is the Communist Party of Russian Federation? It was founded by those officials of the former Soviet Union who did not understand in time that the party nomenclatura, you know, that the elite decided to kind of dismantle the Soviet Union and leave with pieces of its property, right? The smart people like Shevardnadze understood it early. You know, Shevardnadze quit as the foreign minister in January 1991, saying something no one could understand. But now we understand. You know, he knew that the Soviet Union was dying, and he was bracing up to get back to power in Georgia. He knew that this ship is sinking, so you better leave it now in order to take on a new ship. And there were other people, including Yeltsin, who understood it, but there were many others who did not understand it. They were cunning people, you know, with important resources, and they were suddenly outside political life. So they created the Communist Party of Russian Federation, and they started to demand their share back, you know, and they got something. You know, a lot of them became rich, successful businessmen. They got their universities, they got their part of the higher education, not a very big one, but still theirs. But now the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is a conglomerate. There are several leaders, mainly in Moscow, who are basically a part of Navalny's movement, who openly allied themselves with Navalny, and who are now running for the Duma. I don't know if I need to give the names now because the elections are still running, but believe me, in 2 days I will tell you, and I will tell you if they manage to win. Then there are Soviet traditionalists whom Zyuganov pretends to represent. I think he's pretending, because I don't believe that he genuinely thinks that you know, he represents the people like Korolev, you know, the creator of the first Soviet missile, you know, the person who sent Gagarin into space. He says that I represent the honest communists, you know, the ones who did not steal, who worked, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, they were...
Who does that work with? Is that still, I mean, because there's a lot of people that I talk to that say that, let's say, demographic, generational issues, they primarily of elderly people, and what is the appeal of like the Communist Party of the Russian Federation for the younger generation, if at all?
Well, I think basically the liberals in Russia and in the West, they were given a very bad service by their own cynicism. I remember Boris Nemtsov saying, the communist voters will die out, and then people will be only voting for Yabloko and for us. He was a leader of the Liberal Party.
And he was a former member of the Communist Party.
I don't remember. I think he only was in Komsomol. He started his political career very early in 1989 in Nizhny Novgorod, fighting the atomic station there. So if he was a member of that party, I think it was for a very short period of time. But this cynical approach, of course, didn't work. Like I think in general, in politics, cynical approaches rarely work actually. So there were some younger voters that KPRF has managed to get in the 90s. Now, a lot of very, very cunning young politicians went into the Communist Party to make careers. Some of them betrayed and defected to other parties, or just went into business, having made their capitals in the Communist Party. There are many cynical people who used it, but well, this ship is still afloat.
When cynicism and politics go together well. I have one more question, then George can close it out. We've gotten used to in the West politics as spectacle, as entertainment. We have colorful figures. We have the Trumps. We have the Boris Johnsons. We have Madame Le Pen, Macron, AOC. It is very much politics of spectacle, and I think that's a diversion to deal with real issues for real people. Is there an element of that in Russian politics? You know, politics of spectacle. Or is because one of the things that, in my personal opinion, and obviously you're a native-born Russian, most people just are not interested in politics because of what happened in the 1990s, and they just want a better life. And politics may influence that, may be part of that, or may not. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, of course, there is a lot of spectacle here, and there's a huge theatrical element. Russia, I keep repeating that Russia is a European country, and of course it's not much worse or much better than the rest of Europe. Thank God we didn't have the latest trends, you know, in ultraliberalism. There are these trends even in the Russian universities and part of a society, but still they're not very pronounced. But you're right, there's a huge element of spectacle in Russian politics, and I find it natural. I remember when I took my interview from Vladislav Surkov in 1992, maybe our viewers will be interested to know that this demonized Vladislav Surkov, the creator of managed democracy under Putin, he started his career as Mikhail Khodorkovsky's aide.
Yep.
He was actually his bodyguard in the beginning. And then Khodorkovsky saw that he's a young, smart guy, you know, reading, and not, it would be a waste, you know, to keep him as a bodyguard. So he became an advisor, and then he was interested in PR. No one knew what PR was in the Soviet Union at the time. So I remember it was 1992. It was already not the Soviet Union, but no one knew what PR was. So I came to Surkov as a correspondent of Komsomolskaya Pravda to talk to him about PR. And I remember that Surkov told me, I don't want real politics. I want a spectacle. And I was so surprised. I said, but we've just got democracy. Well, why wouldn't you like real politics? He said, I love mafia films, but I don't want to live inside the mafia film. So, and I think it explains a lot of what happened in Russian politics after 1993, because 1993 was a mafia film in which you were involved, you know, and the whole city was involved. So after that, I think that element of manipulation, spectacle in politics, of course, became more important, and that's natural. I think the end result was positive. And basically what is going on is that, as I told you, these three priorities of the Russian elite: keeping power, integrating itself with the West, and replacing Soviet guarantees with the Soviet paid social services. The first priority has worked well. The second priority is a total failure, but our elite keeps returning to that second priority. And I think there's still a lot of hope in that, you know, even though the West misbehaves terribly. And we were saved by the fact that when the first priority is in danger, the second priority goes to the back burner. I mean, when it became obvious for the umpteenth time in 2000, I guess, 18, when under Trump, despite Trump's opposition, the Congress adopted this Katsa law, which basically makes all rich people in Russia watched and checked by the American special services who have to report to the Congress about the property of not only of rich people in Russia, but their relatives. They go after families, basically, right? When it happened, then I think our elite decided, I hope, for not for forever, but for some years, that the second priority will have to be on the back burner, at least during the elections. I think it's natural.
Just ask Deripaska when you
exactly.
So just to follow up on that, on the this elite. So this Russian elite that still believes that it can just join this club, that somehow will be accepted into this club of the EU and the United States, and then we'll go back to the good days. Is that elite? Is that represented in the United Russia Party? Is that represented with the people around Putin? I mean, who exactly is? So there are people around Putin who still believe that one day Russia is going to be accepted within this club of the cool countries.
I think there is a huge discussion going on about that. I think this is the main issue they discuss. Let me give you an example. Andrei Kostin, the head of VTB Bank in Russia, one of the richest banks, a very liberal, pro-Western, progressive person. He was not invited. He was in fact prohibited from Davos meeting, I think 2 years ago, when there was still no pandemic. And a few other Russian richest businessmen also. And the reaction from Russia was furious. Like, okay, if they don't go, then no one will go. I mean, the Medvedev will not go, Putin will not go, no one will go. And now today I was listening Kommersant FM, this radio station, liberal radio station, telling us about big business. And the latest report was that Kostin let it know that it is almost forgotten. He may go to Davos this year. So the patience of the Russian elite is boundless, just like the incompetence of the EU is boundless. So these people, I mean, the incompetence and hostility of the West is boundless, and I don't know what next they will do. They already declared Putin's regime kleptocratic, and the European Parliament called not to recognize the results of this election because of Putin's kleptocratic regime. The elections have not yet ended, but they already know that there is fraud and kleptocrats won, right? On the other side, the Russian patience, the reactions from Dmitry Peskov, like, we can only say that we are very, very sad about this. So this game continues. In this game, of course, my sympathy is with the Russian side, not because I am Russian, but because it's a more peaceful, constructive approach. But there are limits to everything.
Dima, to me, from what you just said, and I think George's question is very germane, is that Russia just has not broken out of the paradigm that we had over 100 years ago. Westernizers, and we don't need Europe, we don't need their values, and then the other way around is that only for us to become liberated, we have to shed our past, we have to shed our traditions, and we have to embrace them. I mean, from what you just said, not much has changed.
Right.
No, not only Russia. I think a similar story with Turkey, maybe with a lot of twists and rounds. Similar story with Iran. Westernizers and nativists. Even in India, the main argument was between westernizers and nativists. I think the difference between Russia and India is that India was a colony. So they know the British firsthand. We have never been a colony. Thanks to Peter the Great. I mean, we were supposed to become a Swedish colony, but we didn't become because of Peter the Great. So our people, they were colonized, if you want, by their own government. So if you notice that the first knee-jerk reaction is that the government is bad, the government is to blame, they stole everything, and a lot of people have that illusion that a foreign government may be better. Indians do not have that illusion. A lot of us still have.
Right, but you'd have thought that the experience of the two world wars was basically not very good for Russia. I mean, in World War I, basically, Russia was thrown to the wolves. I mean, hey, why don't you launch an offensive against Germany? I mean, absolutely catastrophe for Russia led to the destruction of the country. I mean, it was, you know, that was entirely pushed to it by the French and the British. And then, of course, World War II, again, well, let Germany and Russia just fight it out and kill one another. So not good experiences, you'd have thought, of the West.
Yeah, but, you know, if you put yourself in the boots of Nicholas II, he actually made the right choice. I mean, Entente was stronger. So if you had to fight, you better fight on the stronger side, you know.
To take on Germany, Imperial Germany, was disaster. I mean, everyone disaster.
It was a disaster. But I think, you know, but your point is, George's point is perfect, except for I would take it from a very different trajectory, is that the West that so many people imagine in Russia is a figment. Okay, it's a place and idea in things like that. It's nothing that has any kind of substance to it in a way, because it is a critique of your current condition. Okay, not necessarily having knowledge of conditions outside of it. Only if we were like it's always conditional that way, because I've met hundreds and hundreds of Russians that have traveled, and Russians still love to travel with the interruption of the pandemic. But over the last 10 years, they say, yeah, it's good. And they have that, they do that really well, but we do this really well. And I wouldn't want that over there coming here. See, it's getting a little bit more nuanced. When you're talking about the political class, well, I think you're right, because when you look at the Davos mafia there, you know, they're like, oh, we should be part of the 1% globalist agenda. They would like that, okay, very much like that, because they feel that they are with their peers. But I think it gets a lot more nuanced as you go down, because I still think that a lot of these people, because Putin was very liberal when he started. I think he's very conservative now, which I like, okay? But I think this is an imagined thing. And I really get tired and impatient when people say they think they know what the West is about when they don't.
Well, you are right. Attitudes are changing. I remember when I first went abroad, and that was strangely to the United States in 1991 to study. The jet that took us to the United States was a time machine. You know, you entered one epoch and you exited the plane. There was another epoch around you. Now the difference is much smaller. Yeah. Of course, I think the right attitude is not why don't I stay here, but the right attitude is why don't I do the same at home. But also I wanted to say that I agree with George that the First World War was actually a disaster, but it was a disaster for everyone, not only for Russia. How could people then allow this to happen? I mean, this is a huge lesson to us. You know, when people now say, oh, this is all a game, you know, the parliament, European Parliament calling Russia kleptocracy, saying that Russia is an enemy, you know, the United States giving nuclear submarines to Australia to fight China. They won't fight China. No, terrible things may happen unexpectedly. Like Stefan Zweig wrote in his memoirs that in June 1914, he went to a very nice resort where Germans, French, English were enjoying themselves, you know, in June. In August, they were already sitting in the trenches, firing at each other and trying to kill each other in the most cruel way. So that was a disastrous summer, which we have to remember. But also, you know, it's you ask about the lessons of the war. I think everyone is forgetting them, not only in the West, but also in Russia. I mean, when I read Alexander Dugin, I still have no idea why people are so enraptured about him. Maybe because he doesn't smile. He never smiles. You know, that's the secret. You know, we all smile, so we are not serious people. And Dugin never smiles. But his idea that there are somehow maritime empires and landlocked empires, and they have to fight each other. And he even invented this new term, thalassocratia, you know, the sea powers, you know, that we have to fight. Well, when I heard it from him on radio, I just wanted to jump and say, Germany almost destroyed us, and it was not a maritime power. How does that fit into your theory? But these people, it's very hard to talk to them about history.
Yeah, well, that's kind of junk food ideology here. George, you want to wrap it up for us?
Yeah, okay. So it is a prediction time. So what do you how do you see it? What's gonna be the outcome?
Well, first, I don't know. I think that United Russia still will be, of course, the largest party. I don't think they will have a absolute majority or constitutional majority. I hope that new faces will emerge in the Duma. I hope that maybe Novые люди and maybe Rodina, maybe one of the Green parties may get into the parliament. Maybe not necessarily as a faction, but they will get if you get 3%, you get state financing for party activity. And of course, I'm sure they will get a few deputies through the single mandate constituencies. And I hope it will have a positive effect on the presidential election. To be frank with you, I'm not sure Putin will run. I'm not sure. But if he runs, there will be a big discussion and there will be changes to the policy. That I can assure you. So
we're getting ahead of ourselves there.
Right.
So what you're saying, Dima, is that Russian politics, it's not just about bears and vodka, right?
No, definitely not. And there is an element of spectacle in it, but not more than in other countries. And this is not such an evil spectacle as we saw in the United States with Biden saying to Trump, "You're a Russian agent," and Trump saying to Biden, "No, you are a Russian agent," and the Chinese with that one too. That was the really bad spectacle.
So, and then the communists will do well, won't do well? What do you think?
Well, I think they will do worse than before because Zyuganov is getting just irrelevant, and I don't think I don't hope at least I hope not that people who support Navalny inside KPRF will get many votes. Of course, I'm sure that the radicals will try to induce people vote against United Russia, including even Stalinists. They will support even Stalinists if only they're against the United Russia. That shows you how cynical Navalny's people are.
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
About serious politics.
I don't think we made it clear enough is that what little support that Mr. Navalny has, he has publicly called for his supporters to vote for the Communist Party, not because they believe in the party or its ideology or its platform, but to hinder the party of power, United.
Yeah, they call it smart voting. And when Yavlinsky dismissed it in his interview on a Russian, by the way, to the Russian media, the West said, I'm quoting German press, Yavlinsky is dancing to the flute of the Kremlin. Simply because Yavlinsky said it was immoral for Navalny to urge people to vote for Stalinists.
I think Yavlinsky has crazy ideas, but I think he's actually a man of integrity. I've interviewed him once, okay, and I stand with that, okay. Dima, thank you very much for, this is a really good, thick description that we have been talking about, and I hope a lot of our viewers, gagglers, will appreciate the time that you've spent with George and I. George, you want to close it out?
Yeah, no, I think it's exactly a very insightful, very useful, and I think that our fellow gagglers will be, very interested and entertained by these insights because everyone is dependent on Western coverage. Most people don't speak Russian and unable to follow things in the Russian media. So I think what you have performed a very, very important, very useful service.
Thank you.
And we are, of course, The Gaggle. You can find us on thegaggle.locals.com. And we will be back very soon. And remember, if you like The Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.
See you soon.